Hi everyone, I'm Taylor Stones and this is my Poet Laureate presentation. I was going to do Robert Frost because he's one of my favorite poets and he was a Poet Laureate, albeit farther back than the assignment would allow. And also because I am already so familiar with Robert Frost, I thought it would be nice to actually find a new poet and be able to broaden my horizons and read new poetry and to go from there. So I ended up picking Billy Collins, who was the Poet Laureate for the United States from 2001 to 2003, I believe. And I picked his collection, 9 Horses, to be able to do my presentation on. It's actually funny that I wanted to do Robert Frost and then ended up picking Billy Collins because on the back of 9 Horses, there's a review by the Boston Globe, and it actually says, "A sort of poet not seen since Robert Frost." And so it's kind of awesome that I picked him because he's just been compared to Robert Frost, which I think is very understandable. They both are able to write about places and have you feeling like you're actually in the poem with him and seeing what he is seeing and seeing what he's observing. So overall, the book of 9 Horses, the poetry is amazing. I've never actually read anything quite like it except for like Robert Frost. It's actually not very I guess the word would be fluff. It's not fluffy and it's not too in your face about romance. It's very much witty and well written, and the places, how he describes places and experiences he had are kind of above and beyond what some poetry is able to do. The 3 poems I picked are Love, Creatures, and Writing in the Afterlife. The poem Love is my favorite out of the whole compilation of poems in 9 Horses. It talks about Billy Collins. I don't know if it's Billy Collins or like a character he's made up, but I'm assuming it's Billy Collins. He is on a train and he's observing this young man, and the young man is nervous and fretful and keeps looking behind him, and so Billy Collins says he's either waiting for someone or he's expecting someone to come and attack him. But he is waiting for someone, and it happens to be a girl, and the entire time he's kind of freaking out when he's with her, and Billy Collins explains it as this awkward kind of love, or not love yet, he just says it's awkward and how he treats her because she's so beautiful, and it gives you this feeling that it's more than just a poem about love. It's a poem about observing love. It's a poem about someone like Billy Collins who's older and has experienced the stages of love and the stages of life, and he's able to see this man and this woman and see an act of 2 people either starting to fall in love or becoming in love, or maybe both assuming they're already in love, but it's very new and it's very fresh and they're very awkward at it. It also was able to go beyond the typical love poem because it wasn't written by either parties who were in love. It was by an outside observer who was able to see, or even not to see, but assume their own assumption of what these 2 people were feeling. He used a lot of religious terms. He talks about the girl, and she's very angelic and soft and very beautiful, and he later ties that in the ending when he's talking about how this young man is looking at her, and this is my favorite part of the poem, so I'd actually like to read it. It says, "I saw him looking up at her and what she was doing, the way the eyes of saints are painted, when they are looking up at God, when he is doing something remarkable, something that identifies him as God." I just thought that was a great way to get an image into your head and to be able to understand what this young man was feeling. Like, he's looking at this girl like she is remarkable, like she's his whole world. There's nothing she could do to, have him lose faith in her, that she's the ultimate, just like saints look at God and are amazed by him and are reassured that he is God and that he is, perfect and all powerful. That's kind of how I felt like this love was. It was more than just going to be a first love that was over quickly. It was a love that was going to last because of how they felt about each other, or at least how this boy felt about the girl. It was kind of a poem that stood out because of the overall theme of his poems were kind of a little on the darker side, not so much like tragic, but a lot of them centered around death, so it was a kind of a breath of fresh air in the poems. Not saying the other poems were bad, but it was just, it stuck out to me because it was such a small, like almost insignificant moment that he turned into grandeur, and it really impressed me and stood out, especially how he wrote it. The next poem, Creatures, I also enjoyed this poem because it was very, very relatable. It was, something that a lot of people are able to experience, especially when you're a kid and you have a vivid imagination. When he talks about seeing faces in wood and in doors and in many inanimate objects, it was cool how he did it, because it wasn't just, oh, I see faces in wood and then moves on. He's very descriptive, and he talks about these faces in the wood being more than just faces in wood. He talks about how he almost like describes them as being alive, like personification. I would see these presences too, in a swirling pattern of wallpaper or in the various screens of a porcelain lamp, each looking so melancholy, so damned, some peering out at me as if they knew all the secrets of a secretive boy. How he's able to create like that childlike wonder, like imagining things indoors but also believing that they're true, that they're really there, that they're alive entities. It made it more interesting to read. It made it more, gave it more depth. I don't want to call it universal. I definitely want to call it relatable. Like when a comedian tells a joke and everyone laughs because it's like, oh, I've totally experienced that. It was the same. It was better to read, and it was more captivating to read because like I've done that. I've looked into doors and seen creatures and imagined they were real, that they were really there, that they were going to come out and somehow be released from their prisons and come out and create chaos. But that's what made that poem stick out to me and really made me appreciate Billy Collins more as a poet, was his ability to make an observation about something that a child would see and that I still see, but I'm more apt to look at when I was younger, and be able to turn it into something that's more than just a childhood imagining. The last poem, Writing in the Afterlife, this one was very complicated for me. It was hard to take it as it trying to be literal, as it trying to be metaphorical, as it trying to just say something to the point. It was about death and about him being in the afterlife and having to write about it and having to describe what it's like to be dead. And so you could either take it as a poem that was about him observing like what his imagination had told him what the afterlife is going to be, what he's trying to get across of what he thinks it's going to be, but like in a way where it was like he was observing, like he was in the moment, he was there, and you as a reader are there with him, like, oh, this sucks, you're stuck to a table with shackles. And so it can either be taken at the surface area of, yes, he is writing about what he thinks the afterlife is going to be, or it could be even deeper of a poet talking about how hard it is to be a poet, how you're shackled to your table, but you're not just shackled to it, you're shackled to it with a rusty, iron ankle breaking shackle. And it was he was trying to show that no matter what, if you want to stop or take a break or you want to end your writing, you can't, because you're pushed to add more details or add more descriptions, or even add a whole new element to what you're writing, you're never ever going to be able to stop because you're a writer and that's what you do. So he also talked about how it was hard for him how they're asking him to write a description of his own death, but in Nine Horses there are multiple times where he talks about his own death. And so it was cool to see how in this poem he's saying how hard it is to write about his own mortality, even though he's already written about it, how he's like even further trying to explain that the poems that he's already written he wants to add to, or he wants to further explain what it's like for him. So all three poems aren't particularly the same, but they're not particularly different either. They're all about observations that Billy Collins is having. They're about whether they are literal observations or coming from the imagination, or if they are from a different perspective. They are all observations and they just have a slight twist to them. I really, really enjoyed these three poems in particular. They just stuck out at me, and they were able to kind of give me the gist of what he was writing about. Creatures was a little more, to me, a very not as descriptive and trying to go deeper into the subconscious or what he was trying to portray, but it was simple, and it was a truth, and it was a good perspective coming just from everybody has had that perspective where we've all looked at doors and seen faces, and love was just an interesting take on a love poem. It wasn't too gushy. It was just kind of powerful in its own little way. And then Writing in the Afterlife, as a thinker, you'll have to read it and come up with your own thoughts on that one. But I really enjoyed Billy Collins as a poet, and I've come to appreciate his poetry. I can't wait to get my hands on another volume, and it actually just made me have a greater appreciation for poetry as a whole. I used to be wary about poetry, especially with meter and iambic pentameter and couplets, and I don't know. So just being able to appreciate his work and his style, which isn't very, I don't know if he has a specific structure, but it's nice that it's prose, but it's not in paragraph form. If it was in paragraph form, I don't think the attention to detail would be as significant. His line breaks and the way he chooses to couple the lines and be able to end his lines and begin anew on a new stanza is, I think, helps make it have the feel of poetry, going beyond just words in a paragraph or sentences in a paragraph. It's very clean, and it flows, and it gives it more of a poetic and artistic feel, and it makes what he's writing about feel not so mundane and everyday, even though some of the stuff he is talking about is mundane and everyday. But I really love his poetry and his writing, and I hope you can pick up a copy of his work and learn more about him too. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed.